2 of our novelization, Star Wars Darth Plagueis by James Lucena. Let's continue on where we left off. The radiant heat about Demnick's primary beat down on his exposed skin, and a persistent offshore wind tugged at the rope. West and south, as far as his eye could see, was an expanse of a desert ocean, curling white hair where it pounded the coastline. Rugged, denuded hills vanished into sea mist. Plagueis imagined a time when forest had blanketed the landscape, before the indigenous calm man had felled the trees for building materials of fire. Now, what vegetation survived was confined to the steep-sided gorges that separated the brown hills. A somber beauty, perhaps. He thought there was more to recommend the planet than deposits of Cortosis ore. A resident of Munilist for most of his adult life, Plagueis was no stranger to ocean worlds. But unlike most monks, he was also accustomed to remote, low-temp ones, having spent his childhood and adolescence on a host of similar planets and moons. With that hemisphere about Demnick rotating quickly tonight, the wind was increasing its strength and the temperature was dropping. The map he had called up on the comlink showed that the planet's primary spaceport was only a few hundred kilometers to the south. Tenebris had intentionally started the port when they had made planetfall, coming into over the northern ice cap rather than over the sea. Plagueis calculated that he could cover the distance to the spaceport by evening the following day, which would still give him a standard week in which to return to Mulist in time to host a gathering on Sojourn. But he knew too that the route would take him through areas inhabited by both elite and plebeian colony. So he resolved to travel at night to avoid contact with the noisy and xenophobic reptilian sapiens. There was little point believing dead bodies in his blood. Cinching the robe around his waist, he began to move, slowly at first, with gathering speed, until to any being watched, he would have appeared a dazzling blur. An errant dust devil racing across the treeless terrain. He hadn't run far before. He chanced upon a rudimentary trail, impressed in places with the footprints of indigenous, and he paused to study them. Barefoot, lower-class Conley had left the prints. Probably fisherfolk, whose thatched roof dwellings dotted the shoreline. Plagueis reckoned the size and weight of the reptilians responsible for the tracks, and estimated the time elapsed since they had passed. Drawing himself up, he scanned the down hills and sniffed the wind, wishing he were imbued with even a touch of Tenebris' olfactory acuity. Up ahead, he was bound to encounter elite Conmate, as well, or at the very least, their cliff-side dome dwellings. Night fell as he resumed his pace, the ocean shore silver under starlight, and night blooming fluorescent to the human air with heady aromas. Predators of any size had been hunted to extinction on the northern island continents, but the deep gorges were home to countless varieties of ferocious insects that set upon him in clouds as he picked his way through the dense underbrush, lowering his body temperature and slowing his breathing to alter the mixture of gases, and his acceleration did little to dissuade the insects. So, after a while, he ceased all attempts at warding them off and surrendered to their thirst for blood, which they drew freely from his face, neck, and hands. Basically mosquitoes. Let them devour the Lord of Plagueis. In the dark wood of their remote world, with a salted wind whistling through trees, and a distant sound of waves like drumming. He would take flight from the underworld in which Sith had dwelled. Awakened from a millennia of purposeful sleep, the power of the dark side would be reborn, and he, Plagueis, would carry the long forged path to completion. Through the night he ran, sheltered inside a shallow cave, while the morning mist was evanescing from the hollows. Even that early, the blue-scaled indigenes were about, appearing from their huts to cast nets into the crashing surf, or paddle boats to stretches of reef or nearby islands. The best of their catch would be carried into the hills to stuff the bellies of the wealthy, with whom rested responsibility about Demnik's political and economic future. Their guttural voices stole into the cave that fit Plagueis like a tomb, and he could understand some of the words they exchanged. He chased sleep, but it eluded him, and he deplored the fact that he still had needed for Tenebris had never slept, but then few if did. Awake in the oppressive heat, he replayed the events of the previous day, still somewhat astounded by what he had done. The Force had whispered to him, "Your moment has come. Play your mistake to the dark side. Act now and be done with this." But the Force had only advised him. It had neither dictated his actions nor guided his turns. That had been his doing. He knew from his travels, with and without Tenebris, that he wasn't the galaxy's sole practitioner of the dark side. No Sith for that matter. Since the galaxy was rife with pretenders, but he was now the only Sith Lord descended from the Bane line. A true Sith. And that realization roused the raw power collided inside him. And yet, when he reached out with the Force, he could detect the presence of something, or some being, of near equal power. Was it the dark side itself, or merely a vestige of his uncertainty? He had read the legends of Bane, how he had been hounded by the lingering presence of those he had defeated in order to rid the Sith Order of infighting, and return the Order to a genuine hegemon by instating the rule of two, a master to embody power, an apprentice to create them. To hear it told, Bane had even been hounded by the spirits of generations, Sith Lords, whose tombs and mansions he had desecrated, in his fervent search for holocrons and other ancient devices offering wisdom and guidance. Was Tenebris' spirit the source of the power he sensed? Was there a brief period of survival after death during which a true Sith could continue to influence the world of the living? It was as if the mass of the galaxy had descended on him. A lesser being might have heaved his shoulders. But Plagueis, wedged into his clandestine tomb, felt as weightless as he would have in deep space. He would outlive any who challenged him. Hours later, when the voices had faded, and the insects' feeding frenzy had started anew, pain roused Plagueis from tortured slumber. The tunic was adhered to his swollen flesh like a pleasure bandage, but blood had soaked from the wound and soaked through to the robe. Slipping silently into the night, he limped until he had suppressed the pain that began to run. Beads of perspiration evaporating from his hairless head on the dark robe unfurling behind him like a banner. Famished, he considered raiding one of the local homes and feasting on the eggs of some low-caste Connie, or perhaps on the blood of her and her mate. But he reined in his impulses to strike terror, his appetite for destruction, satiating himself on bats and the rotting remains of fish the waves had washed ashore. Hurrying along the black sand beach, he passed within meters of dwellings, built from blocks of fossilized reef stone. But he glimpsed only one indigent who, on leaving his hut naked to relieve himself, reacted as if he had seen an apparition, or else in hilarity at the figure Plagueis must have cut in the robe and boots. On the cliffs, high above the beach, artificial lights glimmered, announcing the homes of the elite in the proximity of the spaceport, whose ambient glow illuminated a broad area of the southern littoral. His destination close at hand, each incoming ocean wave reverberated inside him, summoning an unprecedented tide of dark energy. The knotted tendrils of time loosened and he had a glimpse into Valdemnic's future. Embroiled in a multi-fronted war, a galactic war, in part because of its rich deposits of coltosis, but more as a pawn in a convoluted game. The subservient colony turned against those who had mastered them for eons. Lost in reverie, Plagueis almost failed to notice that a massive breakwater now flowered up the curve of the beach. Stone jetties jutted into a broad, calm bay, and behind the wall a city climbed into a surrounded of deforested hills. Colony of both classes were about, but dispersed. Among them were off-worlders of many species, most from neighboring star systems, but some from as distant as the core. The spaceport formed the city's southernmost outskirts, made up of clusters of modular buildings, prefabricated warehouses and hangars, illuminated landing areas for cargo and passenger ships. To a being unfamiliar with isolated worlds, a tour through the spaceport would have seemed closer to time travel, but Plagueis felt at home among the cubicle house hotels, dimly lighted tap cafes, and squalid cantinas, where entertainment was costly and life was cheap. Raising the cowl of the robe above his head, he kept to the shadows, his height alone enough to draw attention. With security lax, he was able to circulate among the grounded vessels without difficulty. He ignored the smaller intersystem ships and they were long-haul freights, and even then, only those that appeared to be in good condition. Mutilist was several hyperspace jumps distant, and only a ship with adequate jump capability could deliver him there without too much delay. After an hour of searching, he found one to his liking. A product of core engineering, the freighter had to be half a century old, but it had been well maintained and retrofitted with modern sensor suits and subspace drives. That it bore no legend suggested that the ship's captain was interested in having the ship made, a name for himself. Longer than it was wide, IS 4473 had a narrow fantail, an undermount cockpit, and broad cargo bay doors, which permitted it to take on large freight. With the registry number stored in his comlink, Plagueis angled his way to the Spaceport Authority building. At that time of night, the dilapidated structure was all but deserted, save for two thick-knit economy guards who were sleeping on duty. Loosening the rope sash to provide ready access to his lightsabers, Plagueis eased past them and disappeared through the main doors. Faint light from unoccupied offices spilled into the dark hallways. On the second floor, he found the registrar's office, which overlooked the largest of the landing zones and the silent bay beyond. A comp that had been an antique 20 years earlier sat atop a desk in a smaller private office. Plagueis placed his comlink alongside the machine, and an instant later had sliced into the spaceport control network. A search for the freighter revealed that it indeed go by a name, the Woe Begone, out of Ormandel. Scheduled to launch the following morning, the ship, with a light crew of 8, including one droid, was bound for several worlds and the Ariel sector, carrying cargoes of former sea life. According to the manifest, the cargo had already cleared customs and was housed in a refrigerator hangar, awaiting transfer to the ship. The good news was that Woe Begone's ultimate destination was Ithor, on the far side of the Hadean Highway. A side trip for Mulenist, therefore, might not strike the crew as too great a detour. Plagueis called up an image of the freighter's captain, whose name was given as Ellen Law. Opening himself fully to the Force, he studied the image for a long moment, then, exhaling slowly, he stood, erased all evidence of his technological intrusions, and returned the comlink to his robe's inner pocket. The Woe Begone had been waiting for him. Now, we move on to Chapter 3. Woe Begone. Plagueis' instincts about Beldemnik were correct. The planet's rugged beauty was of a sort that appealed to the hedonistic side of human nature, and would one day draw the wealthiest of the species to bask in the warm light of its primary, tow its pristine sands, swim in its animated waters, and dine on the toast on fish that filled its vast oceans. But in those days, humans were still relatively scarce in that part of the Outer Rim, and most visitors to Beldemnik hailed from hot space, or the far reaches of the Perlumian trade route. And so Captain Ellen Law was Togruta, and her first mate a Zabrak named Makab. The Woe Begone's pilot was a Balsor, her navigator a Treslian, and her 3 crew members Clatunian, Kalish, and an Aqualish of the Kata race. Quote, near human. All to use the term favored at that time in the Corps, where chauvinism had been raised to an art form. The only non-sentient was a bipedal, multi-appendage droid called, quote, 114D, after its model number. Beldemnik was but one of their planetary haunts, as often as they could not be spotted. Spotted on Vestral, Sikkim 4, or Carlix's Folly, but all were similar in that Captain Law. Law and her shipmates rarely saw anything more of the planets than what lay within a radius of 5 kilometers from the principal spaceports, and their contact with indigenes was limited to spaceports functionaries, merchants, information brokers, and those in the pleasure professions. Theirs was a precarious business. At a time when pirates plied in the intersystem trade routes, hyperspace beacons were few and far between, and a lapse in judgment could result in disaster. The cost of fuel was exorbitant. Corruption customs officials had to be bribed, and import and export taxes were subject to change without notice. Delays meant that cargoes of foodstuffs could lose the freshness that made them desirable, or worse yet, spoil altogether. Dangers were manifold, and the earnings were meager. You had to love the work, or perhaps be on the run from the law, yourself, or whoever else. As a consequence of having inhibited too much local grog and gambled away too many hard-earned credits, and perhaps as atonement for so much carousing, concerns about the coming tribe had bobbed to the surface of Captain Law's behind a lake, an inflated balloon held under water, then released. Quote, no oversights this run. She was warning the crew in a gentle way, as they made their way across the landing zone to the waiting ship. The fact that she had used the same euphemism, blur, had to minimize the impact of the near catastrophe he had caused made all them laugh. Except the Balasar, who lowered his head in mock shame, his twin antenna valves deepening in color. Quote, "We take your meaning, Captain," Mocap said. Quote, "No inopportune omissions." Quote, "Ineradicable errors," the Kalish, P.P. Rosh, interjected. Quote, "Dumbass mistakes," Du Pseudo completed, his close-set, inward-curving tusks in need of a thorough scaling. The captain allowed them a moment of merriment. Quote, "I'm serious," she said, as they approached the woebegone's lowered boarding ramp. Quote, "I'll say it again. This ship operates as a democracy. I'm your captain because knowing who's good at what is just something I have a talent for." She looked at Blur. Quote, "Do I ever tell you how to pilot?" Then at Samasali, quote, "Do I ever question your decision about jump points?" Quote, "No, Captain," the two said, as if by rote. Quote, "So I simply speaking, as a member of what should be a competent team, and not as a commander," she said, blew out of her breath, in a way that shook her trio of striped head tails. Quote, "Either we turn a profit on this run, or we think about getting to the huts for another loan." Even Wanda, who had more dealings with various huts than anyone else, bemoaned the mere prospect. Quote, "That's right," Law told the Colusian, quote, "and don't any of you fool yourself into thinking that we can float an honest loan, because no bank worth its assets are going to accept the woebegone as collateral." While Captain Blur traded quick glances before the Zabrak said, quote, "Excuse me for saying so, Captain, but you didn't seem particularly concerned about the credit last night." Quote, "Watch what you say," Law told her first mate, barely restraining a smile. Quote, "I thought you were ready to give that young thing the ship," Pee-Pee said, joining the tease. Law waved a hand of dismissal. Quote, "I was just toying with him." Quote, "Toy, being the operative word," Mocap said, quote, "since he was young enough to still play with them." The captain planted her hands on her hips. Quote, "I can be convincing when I want to be." Quote, "Oh, that you were," Zito said, reigniting a chorus of laughter that accompanied them into the woebegone swinging cabin space, where 11-4D was waiting. Quote, "Everything in order?" Law asked the droid. The droid raised 3 of its appendages in an approximation of a salute. "Ship shape, Captain." Quote, "All the cargo's aboard and accounted for." "Aboard and accounted for, Captain." Quote, "You checked the thermal readouts?" "An each bay, Captain." She returned a satisfied nod. Quote, "Well, all right then." The shipmates split up, each with duties to perform. Blur and Samasali to the cockpit. Zuno, Wandau, and Pee-Pee to check that the cargo had been properly stowed. Macab and 11-4D to seal the ship. And Captain Law to get clearance from Podemnic Spaceport Control. Without fanfare, the ship left the warm world behind and jumped from cold ether into the netherworld of hyperspace. Law was still seated at the communications console when Blur radioed her from the cockpit. Quote, "We need your input on something." Quote, "Since when?" she said. "Seriously." She headed forward and had no sooner ducked into the cockpit than Samasali indicated a flashing telltale on the ship's status display suit. A small metal plate below the telltale read, "Cargo Bay or Ambient." Quote, "Too hot or too cold?" Law asked Tetruslian. "Too cold." Law flicked her forefinger against the telltale, but it continued to flash. Quote, "Funny, that usually works," she said. She studied. Somebody saw his frown. "What do you think?" He sniffed and ran a hand over a hairless, deeply fissured head that mirrored the appearance of the convo. Looted brain it contained. Well, it could be the bay thermostat. Or, or one of the shipping containers could have opened by itself. Maybe during the jump, Blair said, from the pilot's chair. Quote, okay, so we go check it out. She glanced from Blair to Samisali and then shook her head in ignorance. Quote, what are you telling me? Blair answered for the two of them. Quote, remember the Cybrek the Maul was talking to in the cantina? Quote, which cantina? She said, then added, quote, no, I remember him. He was looking for a lift. Samisali nodded, quote, he'd been booted from his last freighter. He didn't say why, but Maul thought he smelled trouble and said we couldn't take him aboard. Law followed the clues they were giving her and nodded, quote, you're thinking we have a stowaway? Quote, just as I thought, the Jocelyn said, which is why you wanted to check with me before going to fit. Exactly. Law's face grew almost as wrinkled as Samisali's. Quote, the ship would have told us if anyone had tampered with the anti-intrusion size. Quote, unless he came in with the cargo, Blair said. Quote, you mean it signed one of the containers? Blair nodded. That Haley Sniff is an icicle by now. Law turned to Samisali. Does Bay 4 have a feed seed? Quote, on screen, Samisali said, swiveling his chair, face the status displays. Law put her palms flat on the console and leaned toward the screen with the Dresden brought up. Grainy views of the cargo bay. Finally, the remote cam found what they're looking for, an open shipping container, wreathed by the clouds of coolant, with its cargo of costly medkits, all ready to be frosting. Quote, Spanova! Lowe started with the next view of the cargo bay stunned her into slack-jaw silence. Blair blinked repeatedly before asking, is that what I think it is? Law swallowed hard and found her voice. Quote, well, it sure isn't the Cybrek. And I will be ending there as our introduction to chapter 3. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed that reading and some of the more scenic debuts that took place in this chapter. And now we're getting more into Plagueis' story where he's on his own, ventures on his own, and soon, hopefully we'll begin to the chapter where he gets back to his homeworld and we can see more of his day-to-day, behind-the-scenes work, since he no longer is a Sith apprentice to Tenebris. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.